Hello to everyone. It's time to start. We want to warmly welcome you to today's webinar, Media Education for Older People. And I'm glad to see so many people on screen. This webinar is going to be recorded and will be will be accessible on Nord Media Network's website as well. I'm Maarit Jaakkola. I'm working as the co-director at Nordicom, a center of Nordic media research at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, and I will be your host today. This is the opening lecture of a webinar series. This webinar series will be about media and information literacy, MIL, in Europe. With this series, we want to stimulate research-based discussion on topical issues and contribute to the exchange of ideas between countries for benchmarking and inspiration. We have seen that we cannot take for granted that we always know what's going on in the neighboring countries. And that's the starting point for this series. The first three webinars deal with the Nordic countries, Finland, Denmark, Norway, with different aspects and target groups of MIL in focus. These three webinars are organized by Nordicom in collaboration with the Swedish Media Council. This media authority in Sweden has newly established a national network for MIL stakeholders to strengthen the media literacy in Sweden. And this network will also include a forum for academic MIL research, collecting researchers from different disciplines to discuss MIL-related questions, run by Nordicom. These webinars have thus partly an objective to engage this new community. Then after the Nordic webinars, the webinar series will be continued with 7 more MIL-related webinars in collaboration with Media and Learning Association. You can read more about this on Nord Media Network's website, and I will also leave some important links in the chat box in a moment. Also, on Nord Media Network, which is a digital platform for Nordic media research coordinated by Nordicom, we have created a web page for today's webinar. What's interesting is that it contains some showcase videos showing the best practices from Finland in this topic. You can learn about online grandmas chatting to teenagers, or how to promote computer skills among senior citizens. Please take a look at these videos after this webinar on your own hand. And there are also some other resources for further reading, links, some recent academic literature, and even today's slides can be downloaded there. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the chat box. I will pick up them at an appropriate moment, most probably after today's talk, and bring them to discussion. We will have 45 minutes of time, so this is going to be quite concise. So today's topic is Finland, which is one of the few countries in the world with a centralized media literacy policy updated last year. These guidelines suggest that media education should be more inclusive, not cover only young people and children, but also older generations. Today's speaker is an expert in this area. Päivi Rasi works as an associate professor in media education at the University of Lapland in Rovaniemi. She's also chairing the Finnish Society on Media Education, which is an association founded in 2005, bringing together various MIL stakeholders on a regular basis. Päivi will now give us an overview of the most acute questions in research and practice when it comes to studying, supporting, developing MIL practices among senior citizens. So warmly welcome, Päivi. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Maarit, for this wonderful presentation. And as you quite aptly say, the screen is now mine in this situation. So I'm just going to start by trying to share my screen. Let's see what happens. Share. And then I want to, whoops, I'm losing it. Whoops. One more try. Oh, there is a problem now, Maarit. For some reason, it's not like holding on. I keep missing it when I... No. Can you hear me still?
Yes, we can hear you. Let's try it this way. If I can share your slides.
Yeah, because there's something now, the screen drops down every time I try to share it. And it didn't happen a few minutes ago, but now it does.
Well, this is how it is with...
It's great that we have the plan B always ready.
Yes.
Okay, so my presentation is here. We got it all set up. And first of all, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. And I'm always very glad to have the opportunity to talk about older people's media education and media literacies, because until quite recently, this topic has received very little research and practice attention from all of us doing our work in this field. So I think it's a great contribution from the organizers to have this topic on the webinar list of topics. So thanks again for that. So yes, I have an academic career, and I also work at a non-governmental institution or organization in Finland, Finnish Society on Media Education. And as Maarit we were talking about media education and media literacy with Maarit before this webinar. So I think this might be one of the specialities of the Finnish context. The fact that we have quite close collaboration between researchers in the field and also practical workers, teachers, educators, youth workers, etc., doing like practical media education work in the field. So that's one feature of the Finnish media education field. Let me just give you a little bit more of a contextual information about myself and media education in Finland. In Finland, we have two specific media education master's programs in universities. One of them is at the University of Tampere, or Tampere University as it's called nowadays. And the other one is at the University of Lapland, and that's where my colleagues work. So that's why I have written here Media Education Master's Program as well. The photos in my presentation have been taken by photographer Marko Junttila, and they're all focusing on seniors with technology. So we can move forward, Maarit, thank you. Okay, so as you all very well know, as long as we do research and development work in projects funded by different funding organizations, we need to give credit to these projects. So I want to give credit to two projects that are ongoing presently, and both of these projects deal with older people's media literacies and digital competencies. So the first of these projects is called Ikäihme, and it's funded by the Teacher Education Development Program of the Finnish Ministry of Education and Culture. And you can see all the logos here the necessary logos. I just want to tell you at this point that this project is about developing Finnish teacher education towards a more inclusive orientation, so that teachers, future teachers, are also prepared to deal with older people. This is a challenge that we have quite recently noticed, that teacher education for older adults needs some development. So that's the project, the first project. And then the second project is called Harvest. And this project is done in collaboration with Umeå University in Oulu and Catholic University of Milan in Italy. And it's about how older people use, learn, and deal with e-health technologies, different technologies for providing health practices and health services to older people. So these are the two projects that I will be sort of drawing from. And we can move forward. To give you some background information about Finnish media education. So as Marit was already referring to some of the dimensions of Finnish media education, I want to pick up some facts that maybe are our strengths. But as Marit said, Finland is very often considered as a model country for media literacy education. Okay, we acknowledge this, and in some respects we do a good job. But we also acknowledge that we have a lot of development areas, and older people's media education is, of course, one of them. But what makes us special, of course, is that we have media education written, inscribed in our legislation. In our legislation, it says that we have a governmental media education authority, which is called the National Audiovisual Institute's Department for Media Education and Audiovisual Media. In Finland, we call this institution MEKU, the acronym from the Finnish words. So it is in our legislation and a governmental authority. Secondly, I'd like to capitalize on the fact that in Finland we have quite a holistic understanding of media education. First of all, that it should include people of all age. So while we focus on younger people, we also want to focus on adults and older adults and older people. And we also have the National Media Education Policy document. The picture of it is on the right. So quite recently, last year, I think in December last year, it was updated. And it quite clearly states that everyone is entitled to extensive and meaningful media literacy, meaning people from different origins, from different national geographical areas, and from different age groups, etc. Media education is not only supported or inscribed into the policy of Ministry of Education and Culture, but also into other national governmental bodies' texts and policies. So we can say that in Finland we engage in administrative cross-sector collaboration. And we also have a large number of organizations, very many of them in terms of older people's media education are NGOs. And this has also been acknowledged by the European Audiovisual Observatory in 2016 in their report on how the countries in Europe are doing in terms of media literacy practice. And yes, we do have media education in our national curricula, starting from early childhood education, going through pre-primary education, and also basic and upper secondary education. At least from my screen, a little bit of text is missing from here, but I think it says that we have media education also in our teacher education programs. But I'd like to say, so that I don't sound too self-content, that there's a lot of things to develop in how teacher education and media literacy come together. So this is not a perfect match yet. So there's work to be done. We can move from this background information to sort of content areas of media literacy, because today we are concentrating on people over 65 years of age. And first of all, I'd like to say that they're very important and very interesting in terms of media literacy and media education. All of us know, and we've been hearing this message for quite a long time now, that the population is aging. And we also see around us that the services and communication is to a growing extent being digitalized. And this, of course, creates pressures for older people to use the technologies and digital media. However, even if this group is very interesting and important, we have very scant research. Some of you may know the OECD's survey of adults' skills, which is PIAAC, the acronym. This large survey stops at the age of 65. So we don't know a lot about people over 65 years in a systematic way. And also a very important fact in terms of people over 65 years is that they're actually outside the formal educational system. And they're also, most of them are, a large majority of them are outside workforce training. So the question remains, who is to support their media literacies? We have a lot of challenges, you know, at the European level, in Finland, in the Nordic countries. We know that from research that people over 65 years of age, at least some of them, may lack adequate media literacy. And therefore, we have the exclusionary effects, the potential exclusionary effects of digitalization. We are also left with the question, because these people are outside the formal educational system and workforce training, so we are left with the question, who is to provide training and support? Who is the best person and best organization to do that? And then we are left with the questions that what kind of support is needed and for what aspects of media literacy? Here I want to sort of describe in a very general way the aspects of media literacy as the use of digital media, the critical understanding of digital media and communication. And the third aspect would be to participate in creating digital content in the communication world and settings. So these are the three aspects that I'm referring to. Also, as we've noted in Finland, teacher education is perhaps not yet quite prepared to dealing with older people as their potential target group, as the potential target group of future teachers. So that's a development challenge as well. And after having, described the general background and the challenges, we can then move forward again to talking about what do we think are the most need of support among the 65 plus age group. We think, and this is mostly based on our review of research literature that we did earlier this year with my colleagues, Hanna Vuojärvi and Susanna Rivinen. So this review gave us a lot of information about how media literacy education is being provided and also being studied at this particular moment. So we know from this review that seniors with health problems are a group that we should target. Also seniors age 75 plus and more, this group that gerontologists often call oldest old. And this is also visible in, for example, internet user statistics, where we see a quite drastic drop in the user statistics in people that are older than 75 years. They use the internet clearly less than the younger age groups. We also want to target seniors with little experience with technology and seniors in minority populations, for example, older migrants who may have language problems, language issues in their media literacy in this new country. And a very important thing is that for seniors' media literacy, their social networks are highly important. They have a lot of help and they get a lot of help and support from the social networks. So those people who are homebound and at risk of social isolation, we should somehow be able to target those people who would like to get help and support for their media literacies. And in the following PowerPoint slide, we can then talk more closely about the research. And again, I am referring to research we have done in our unit, the Media Education Hub, as we have been looking for research evidence of older people's media literacy. And I can safely say that there's scant research evidence at the moment, but it's getting to be more. And I would say that there has been, in recent years, there has been more research than before. Even if we have a pretty scant research, we know that at least some older people may lack necessary skills, for example, to identify fake news, especially in social media, which is a new environment for many of them. Also in the UK context, research evidence shows that especially older people have difficulties in understanding online advertising, like what is an advertisement? And when they, for example, Google things, there is probably not always enough understanding about why certain links come first. So these things need attention. Also in Finland, a research group, Eronen, its colleagues here, the third bullet point, found out quite recently that people over 75 years of age have problems, self-reported problems in judging the trustworthiness of information about health risks that is presented in media. So there's a development challenge as well. In our research in the Finnish context on how older people use digital health and welfare services, we've noticed that there are people who have learning problems or other problems in using these technologies. So another development challenge exists. And also, as in terms of internet safety and privacy, there are issues with older people's understanding the different ways in which companies collect personal data online. And this research result is from the UK context. But anyway, we have scattered information giving us hints about that there's something to be done for older people's media literacy. And another source where we can look into when trying to get information about older people's media literacy is, of course, different internet user statistics and some prior research. And these, of course, depend on each national context. So I'm referring to, for example, official statistics of Finland and statistics by Ofcom in UK, who is following older people's media and internet use. But I'm sure that these statistics will not give a very much different picture within the Nordic countries. And from these statistics, we can glean that older people aged 65 or more are more often narrow users of the internet and what we call non-users who haven't used the internet, let's say in the last 3 months or ever. They also use the internet in a less mobile way, meaning that the smartphone is not their favorite, as for the younger group it is, for the younger groups it is. And they also use social media less, clearly less than the younger age groups. Older people have a lot of what we call proxy users, people who do internet tasks for them, who pay their online bills, for example, or look up for information. They are usually partners, children, and other people in the household. And older people also get assistance from what have been called warm experts, people in their relatives, friends, family who help older people to do and to deal with the internet. However, I want to stress, and I'm sure many of you can agree with this, as we have a lot of older people in our acquaintances and we know a lot of older people, that there is a lot of diversity. And this is the conclusion that tens of years of gerontological research has come up with. Even if we can say that in general, older people use the internet less, there's high diversity and differences between themselves. So we have like enthusiastic users with the all modern technologies, and then we have the narrow users who only choose to use some of the appliances and some media applications. Yes, so this is what I wanted to say about the prior research on the topic. So now we move on to, again, referring quite strongly to our review, the scientific literature review that we did earlier this year. So now I want to answer, based on that, what kind of media education would be best suited for older people. And first of all, I'd like to bring forth our finding about the multidimensionality of media education. And the dimensions, again, are the use of technologies, understanding, critical understanding of digital media, and the third would be creation of digital content. So from our review, we learned that presently media education interventions around Europe target media literacy from a somewhat narrow perspective. Yes, it's safe to say that. I think the majority of the research that we found was targeting older people's technical competencies in using digital media. So there was a lot of training and interventions to promote their technical skills in using different applications, devices, media environments, and so forth. But in terms of media literacy, as you all know, it's much more than that. So our argument is that media education for older people should be much more multidimensional, meaning that we should promote older people's critical understanding of, for example, news, advertisements, and health information. And also we think that we should promote their competencies and willingness to participate actively in digital communication as producers of content as well, not only just consumers and users and people who understand what is provided for them. So these are the aspects that our review indicated. And then secondly, about the pedagogies. This is, I think, a very important question. what kind of pedagogies are suited for older people's media education. And I think that the main principle is that pedagogies that are in line with quite classic adult education principles. You know, for example, Lindemann also already in 1926, stated that adults' education should have certain principles, and they're all listed here. So it should be based on their needs, their orientation to learning is very much life-centered. So we should look for problems, issues, cases that deal with their own lives. And also experience, their long experience should be taken into consideration and as a resource for learning. And also they have a very deep need for self-directing. So that's why, for example, small group work and peer-to-peer teaching seem to work very well. And what I'd like to especially accentuate is that the differences between people increase with age. So the teaching should be very individual and need-based. And our review said that, first of all, the media education for older people should be need-based because they're individual, they're diverse, and the differences grow as they age. So their needs, competencies, and perceived value of the internet should be the baseline for the education. Second thing that the research indicated was that their self-efficacy in terms of digital media users is sometimes fragile, meaning that we should foster and support their self-efficacy so that they believe in their abilities and they have the feeling that I can do this if I want to, of course. And the third one, the very critical factor in the pedagogy aspect is social support and respectful atmosphere. A very important fact that several of the studies in our review seem to indicate. And also, like, teacher-led instruction works well, but preferably in small groups. And one-on-one teaching has been proved very efficient for older people. And the last one here, which I quite can't see, but it is there, and you'll see in the slides later, is peer-to-peer teaching, meaning people at the same situation, about the same age, will teach each other. And this is very, very important and very efficient for older people. We also have some results from intergenerational learning, meaning that younger people teach older people. For instance, that teenagers will teach older people to use social media. But for this particular pedagogy, I think the research evidence is not that strong yet, that I would say that it's something that research supports. Okay, and I think we're moving to towards the end of the presentation. And I'd like to give attention also to the fact that the pedagogies need enriching for older people. And I think that more creative pedagogies are needed that capitalize on digital content production. And also we have very little research evidence, and I think very little practice on blended and online learning for older people. So that's something to develop in further research and practice work as well. So that the aim of the media literacy education is not only to support their technical abilities, but in a more broad way to foster empowerment and their active role in society. And the quote here by Forsman, I will leave it for you to read later, is about that we should not only target things that can be measured, like can older people use this and this technology? Do they have the competencies for that? But we should target broader societal perspectives and aims. And finally, we have the question that who should provide media education for older people. And the picture that you'll see here is my old home for nearly 15 years in Lapland, in the middle of forest, where neighbors could not be seen. But I know that in the village where I lived, up here in Rovaniemi, I had a lot of neighbors, older neighbors in that village, who were in a little bit of a trouble when their spouses or their social networks maybe died or became smaller. So that's a very critical situation for the Nordic countries where we have a sparsely populated population. Population is very sparse in some regions. So the question is that who should provide media education for older homebound people in sparsely populated areas? And we have projects like exploratory projects where postal services or public libraries on wheels, what we call mobile libraries, are also providing media literacy support for older people, because who else is going to do that in their homes in these sparsely populated regions? So this list here on the left that you'll see, it's a Finnish list. Of course, in each national context, the list will look a little bit different. But in terms of Finland, I think cross-sector and multidisciplinary collaboration is needed. And here's a list of the institutions that I know that have media literacy activities in their, services. So we have a lot of different organizations, and what is of course needed is their collaboration. Marit, do we have time for the example, or should we just skip that?
Maybe we can take it very short.
Okay, just a couple of minutes, an example to end my presentation with. As I was saying that the cross-sectional collaboration is very important. Here's one example of a Finnish peer-to-peer teaching project to support seniors' digital competencies as service users. So in this slide, you'll see a lot of logos of different organizations. And as you can see, all of these organizations have collaborated to support older people. Also, besides these organizations, this project involved peer-to-peer teachers that were called digital ambassadors, meaning older people who taught their peers to use different services. For example, the social insurance institution services, the services of regional bank, or the services of hospital, different districts in northern Finland. And the last example then, a minute for that, is an example which I want to bring up to you because it's an online training for older people for promoting their critical media literacy. It's an online, what we call study circle, where let's say 4 to 5 older people come together in Skype to discuss news media contents. And there's a facilitator from a non-governmental organization to help them in that. So with these two practical examples, I want to end, and the next slide I think has my contact information in case you want to contact me later. But now I think we have a couple of minutes for questions, do we, Marit?
Yes, we have. Thank you, Päivi, for this great presentation. As you see, this is a highly topical issue and an emerging research area, and it's great that you have provided us with this overview right now. There is one question from the chat box. Mia Andersson Wikholm is asking, what are the main reasons for there being such a diversity between MIL skills between different groups of older people? Are there some numbers or percentages on how large the group of sufficient or insufficient users are?
Yes, looking at the Finnish context, the statistics give us information that starting from 65 years, the percentage of people not using the internet is rising, so that it's the biggest in terms of people over 75 years of age, where it starts to be over 50%, even more. But of course, from that percentage, we cannot glean that why is this? Why are they not using the internet? But I know that some of them don't even want to. So there's no willingness to use the internet. For some, it's a matter of ability. So the skills are needed, are missing. Some people don't see the internet as relevant for them. So there are very, very different reasons, individual reasons. But from the demographic reasons or the demographics, we can glean that people in rural countryside context typically use the internet a little bit less. And this probably is dealing with their educational level. So we know that educational level, prior education, is connected with internet use. Also, in some countries, not perhaps in the Nordic countries so much, but gender is an issue connected with internet use. So it's a complicated question, as you know, every social issue is.
Sorry. Thank you. Any other questions? You might just put your mic on and ask directly now, because in the chat box I didn't find any questions. Well, I have one. I was just thinking it's interesting the ways how we talk about older people, because from my school time I remember we could express elderly people, but now it's now felt as rather offensive. We say rather older people. There are also many euphemisms how to talk about older people. In Swedish we have årsrika, rich on years, or in Finnish we have ikäihminen, aged person or person with age, or we just talk about seniors. So how much has the research you have been doing affected on these discourses, and do you feel that you are also changing attitudes regarding how to talk about the older people and see them not as vulnerable groups or victims or helpless people, but more in a more constructive way as active citizens?
Yes, thank you for the question. This is exactly what I would hope for that I'm doing. And I'd like to think that I'm doing that. Of course, you can never be sure. But yes, I think there is still a discourse about older people as incompetent outsiders of the digital society. And actually, I did a small piece of research that will be published later this year in Aging and Society about the representation of older people in Finnish newspapers as users of digital media. And in that study, it was quite surprising how negatively older people were portrayed in terms of their relationship with the internet. So I do want to make a change in how we think about older people. And that's why I also want to capitalize the diversity issues within older people. But at the same time, I think we need to speak for their opportunity to say no to the internet. So that's like, I think for me, it's a question of democracy, a question of being able to opt out as well. So I think we also need to have other means of providing information and services than only the digital means.
That's a good point. Any other questions? I see Mikhail.
Yes, I have a question. Can you hear me? I have headphones. It's okay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Päivi. I found this very interesting, and especially the latter part here now with the comments from Marit and others, and your own very important answers to this. And I was wondering about this concept of the active 65 plus citizen in relation to how we can understand critical thinking. I think you were touching upon that in your last answer here, that maybe the option to opt out could be part of taking a kind of critical stance in relation to a very dominating ideology around digitalization, which of course is well meant, but also is a form of governance and a form of power exercise. So I was wondering if you have something more to say now with this brief time left around critical thinking, critical consciousness, critical activities, and also kind of progressive idea of pedagogics also for elderly people. We think that way naturally when it comes to young people. We've been doing it since Dewey and LNK and so on, but never around old people. They're like finished. So
right. Yes, thank you for bringing up this very interesting connection with active aging, because we've had this discourse on active aging for I think already 10 years or even more, and it's starting from the European Union's funding programs and the special year for active aging. So for me, activity could also mean critical thinking and rejecting the use of some applications, some media environments, etc. And I think this needs to be made clear as well. In Finland, we have research on what we call media agency. And in terms of media agency, I think one of our researchers has been capitalizing on the fact that media agency could also mean rejecting and saying no to certain things. And therefore, older people's non-use of internet should also, I think, be understood sometimes as an active standpoint and an active voice of rejecting the things that they think are not, meaningful for them. So yes, I thank you for the question. One thing that I want to share with you is that I have a PhD student presently who is looking at older people's relationships with media from the viewpoint of wisdom. So he's developing a concept of media wisdom and looking at how using media in a limited way could actually be a sign of wisdom. So,
thank you. So the time's up. We thank you, Päivi. And
thank you.
Our next webinar in the series will be about preschool children with the case of Denmark with the guest speaker Stine Liv Johansen. So more information will be found on the Nord Media Network's website. So thank you very much for this interesting session. Stay tuned and see you next week.